Well, hello and welcome everybody to ICMDA webinars. I'm Dr. Peter Saunders, the CEO of the International Christian Medical and Dental Association, hosting this today. And we're delighted to have Professor Annelies Wilder-Smith speaking to us on the incredibly topical subject of deploying COVID vaccines equitably. When we planned this about 8 weeks ago, we had no idea exactly where we'd be in the pandemic, but this is the Lord's timing because it could not be more topical. So it's my pleasure to introduce Annelies again. You've been with us once before, along with Professor Kang, together late last year. And Annelies Wilder-Smith is Professor of Emerging Infectious Diseases at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And she also currently serves as a consultant to the World Health Organization, the WHO, in Geneva in Switzerland, where she's the focal point for the SAGE deliberations on COVID-19 vaccines. She specializes in emerging viral diseases such as Zika, dengue, chikungunya, yellow fever, SARS, influenza, and of course now COVID. And in 2003, she was at the forefront of the SARS outbreak in Singapore. And with a career spanning almost 3 decades, she's led and co-led various clinical trials, published more than 350 scientific papers, edited and co-edited textbooks and travel medicine books, served on various editorial boards and scientific committees, including being editorial consultant to the Lancet. You may wonder if she has any free time, but she does. She has a family as well. And she's just told us that she's sitting in the Swiss Alps today, where there's a whiteout outside. She's also the principal investigator of an EU-funded international consortium called Zika Plan, and recently completed another 4-year research project on dengue, also funded by the European Commission. So, Annelies, it's a great honor and pleasure to have you here again.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for your kind introduction, Peter. I do feel immensely honored to be invited to speak to you, because the ICMDA is really very dear to my heart. So equitable deployment of COVID-19 vaccines is obviously currently a hot topic. And I will try to share my insights and data with you, partially also, or maybe particularly through the eyes of me working as consultant to the WHO SAGE working group on COVID-19 vaccines. In fact, I just finished another working group, our meeting on the AstraZeneca vaccine. So this is the reality. The pandemic is accelerating. While we had a bit of a plateau in the summer, now we don't only see a rapid increase again in incident cases, but also in deaths. And the main burden, as you see here, remains the Americas, and the European region, and with Southeast Asia, Eastern Mediterranean, and the Western Pacific region currently actually with a lower burden than we have. So by 24th of January, we've had 97 million cases, and you now know we actually have sadly reached another sad milestone and are now at above 100 million cases and more than 2.1 million deaths. More than 50% of all deaths are attributable to 5 countries: the US, Brazil, India, Mexico, and also the United Kingdom. In the US, COVID-19 has meanwhile overtaken cardiovascular disease and cancer as the leading cause, #1 leading cause of death. You've also seen and noticed the media that the UK has just passed the unfortunate 100,000 death mark. And the US, just in 1 month alone, there were 80,000 deaths. So the epidemic curve is strikingly different between countries, within countries, and also within regions, or between regions, underpinning again how this pathogen moves in clusters, is facilitated by our connectivity, but is really driven by population densities. And the deaths are driven by the population age structure, where population with a higher age, median age, have a higher death rates. But also the epidemic does respond to non-pharmaceutical interventions. And the epidemic as it is in countries is also highly reflective to the extent of the pandemic response the governments have chosen to do. Every virus mutates, and we've been observing mutations for this virus also for a long time, but some new variants are now of particular concern. First, it was the variant that emerged in Denmark in September 2020 related to mink farming, and that resulted in millions of minks being culled. New variants detected in the UK in recent months and in South Africa and also in Brazil have raised a concern of higher transmissibility of some of those variants, possibly, but not yet confirmed, higher, maybe also more severe disease. So really, we have to beat this pandemic. It's accelerating, and the only response is coming together globally to address this. So we know lockdowns are successful, not sustainable, and we really need to get out of these lockdowns. So there's a strong case to act, and ACT is the word for the accelerator for COVID-19 tools and the global collaboration to accelerate development of vaccines, therapeutics, and diagnostics, but not only to develop those tools, but also to drive equitable access and equitable distribution. And one of the main pillars of ACT is COVAX. So by now, more than 190 countries have joined COVAX. That is about almost a large proportion of the population. And the explicit COVAX goals are to end the acute phase of the pandemic by the end of 2021, by delivering 2 billion doses of vaccines by the end of 2021, but also explicitly to guarantee fair and equitable access to COVID vaccines for all participating countries. And there are now more than 190 participating countries. But also it's to support the largest actively managed portfolio of vaccine candidates globally. So at its core, the COVAX facility is a risk-sharing mechanism. So we all had to a priori invest into an array of different platforms, some of which will fail, and I will show you in a minute some have already failed, and some of which will be successful. So for COVAX, any country, all countries in the world were invited to participate. You had to make a commitment and you had to sign up. And once you are, you will receive access to vaccines procured by the facility, by COVAX facility, at a negotiated price. And the backbone is the advanced market commitment. And that also is a security for the companies to really do mass production at risk. So to get the high volumes out, but also for the companies to have the demand guarantee. Now for countries, so for low middle income countries or low income countries, they would be supported through overseas development aid. And as I said, the idea is to get 2 billion doses. So this is a reminder, I showed it last time, but you really have to, I think, understand the high demand. So we have now a population of 7.7 billion people, of which about 20% are children, and because children are so much less effective, we take them out of the calculation. So we still have to vaccinate about 4 to 5 billion population. So with the as we know, the high risk groups are the healthcare workers, and healthcare workers alone are already 160 million worldwide. More than 700 million people are above the age of 65. So if you look at these data and summarize and add them, you already come to a much higher dose than COVAX attempts to achieve, which is the 2 billion. So within this, there's now a demand to do further prioritization to maximize the limited vaccine supply that we have. So to do this, before we even had vaccines, WHO put together a values framework of ethical principles that would underpin and drive the prioritization roadmap. And both are published and accessible and provide the ethical principles. So here are the 6 core principles, and one is human well-being, not only to protect our human health, but also social and economic well-being, human rights, civil liberties, and child development. We intentionally included child development because child development is so severely affected by this ongoing, almost a 1-year ongoing pandemic. Equal respect is to recognize and treat all humans beings as having equal moral status and their interests as deserving of equal moral considerations. Then we also express global and national equity between and within countries. Reciprocity is the principle that we have to honor the obligations to those individuals and groups within countries who bear significant additional risks and burdens for the COVID-19 response, particularly the healthcare workers, but also other essential workers to the benefit of the society. Legitimacy is meant as that global decisions, as we make them through COVAX, with a very coordinated approach, and that it should be transparent, based on science, but also based on shared values. And I think we were driven by ethicists, philosophers, but also Christian principles that we really tried within WHO to make sure that we have these shared values that would then drive our decisions. So these 6 core values were then aligned to 11 public health objectives. And in red, you see the most pertinent for our purpose. So well-being, clearly, our primary focus is currently to reduce deaths and the disease burden, but also to reduce the societal economic disruption that the pandemic response in itself had, and to protect ongoing essential services. But also national equity. So to underline that we do vaccine prioritization, taking vulnerabilities into account, that people without a voice can still have access to a vaccine. And so that we take into account not only biomedical factors, so not only clinical high-risk factors, but also societal factors that make them more vulnerable. And then again, the principle of reciprocity, that we want to give back to people who have given us to protect us in the society. So based on these, before we knew about any vaccines and how vaccines would perform, we came up with the prioritization roadmap. And this prioritization roadmap was important because it does take a lot of time for countries to prepare. And so this roadmap gave countries some time to prepare their rollout. So we had 3 stages: very limited supply, so very limited supply of 1 to 10%, limited supply of 11 to 20%, and then a moderate vaccine supply available up to 50%. And as you see, and as we already know, but I have to repeat it because it's so important. In stage 1, it is clear that we have to prioritize healthcare workers to continue to maintain our healthcare systems and to protect those who are protecting us. But also based on mathematical modeling, it was very clear that if you target the older adults, those above 65 and older, first, you will have the highest impact on reducing deaths. And once you have reached and covered those first 10%, and remember, 10% is already quite a high coverage. And remember that more than 20% of the world's population is actually above the age of 60. you will still need stage 2 to then cover the older adults that you have not managed to cover in stage 1. Then so it was very strongly age-based, and now you then also move into risk-based. So persons with comorbidities that put them at significantly higher risk. But then there are also social demographic groups that may be at higher risk because they may have less access to care, or because they live in settings where they just cannot do physical distancing. And I mean prisons or detention camps, refugee settings, or social demographic groups that put them inherently also at higher clinical risk. And then we recognize that high priority teachers and that school staff need to be vaccinated relatively early on, also to protect those in children who may not have access to all the online learning that we have. So the high priority means teachers for children who have not access to the online teaching like most of our children do. Then stage 3, when you do have a lot of supply, and if I talk 21 to 50%, we're talking about billions of doses. It is then the remaining teachers and the essential workers, healthcare workers who are at lower risk, etc. Pregnant women, there's an asterisk because we do know that pregnancy does increase the risk for more severe disease compared to non-pregnant women of the same age group. But many of the vaccine platforms have not been tested in pregnancy, and basically all current clinical trials exclude pregnancy. So here it really depends on how much data we will have to also vaccinate a pregnant woman. So here, this is back to COVAX, and this is then the allocation framework that they had aimed to build up. So thinking that COVAX would give the vaccines proportionate to the population size with increasing tranches. So initially 1% or 3% as vaccines come in, and then increasing it to up to 20%. And with the idea that countries would follow the prioritization roadmap that was outlined earlier on. So up to 20%, regardless what the epidemiological situation in the country would be, if a country asked for it, they would receive it. Above 20%, it will depend on the epidemiological situation. Is it a country with incredibly high surge of cases? Or is it a country that is very vulnerable to a high surge of cases? That means the healthcare system is quickly overwhelmed, even if the incidence is lower compared to high-income countries where we are not so quickly overwhelmed. This was now all the theoretical ideas before we knew about vaccines. But it's important to have all this in place because later countries will scramble. There will be fights and arguments, and we already see it now, despite what we've done and set in place earlier on. So now we do have data. And the first efficacy data interim analysis came out on the 9th of November. I will always remember this. It was my birthday, and Pfizer came out with the interim analysis showing 95% or above 90% efficacy. And we all danced. We as a WHO, we were all expecting vaccines that could be just above 50% efficacy. So this was an incredible, good surprise, good news. And already on the 18th of November, sorry, Pfizer had already final results, and these were quickly followed by press releases from Moderna, another mRNA vaccine, AstraZeneca, Gamaleya, Sinopharm, then even now Sinovac, etc., all coming out with their interim or even their final analysis. Let us take a little bit of time to go through this busy table. I just want to point out to the cold chain. So again, to remind you that the two mRNA vaccines, the Pfizer and the Moderna, both require ultra cold chain. For Moderna, it's even down to -80, and for For Pfizer, down to -80, and for Moderna, down to -20. But both have, therefore, logistical challenges. The beauty about the AstraZeneca is, and all the others, is that storage, transport, etc., can be handled at normal fridge temperatures of 2 to 8 degrees, and they have much longer storage times. So here I want to dig into a little bit on the mRNA vaccines. So both mRNA vaccines were the first to come out, and that is inherent to the way their platform works. But despite relatively high efficacy data, they both have major challenges. Not only challenges for delivery, but also challenges with anaphylaxis. So the delivery is indeed a much higher delivery cost, because we now use non-standard cold chain requirements that require additional investments in capital equipment. So you have to buy these freezers. You have to set up settings where you can keep the freezers. You have to handle deep frozen shipments. There's a whole logistics that they're flown in to a capital city, and then how do you bring it out into periphery for countries that are huge? It will require extra training, supervision. The logistics are very difficult. The Pfizer has even an unusual syringe size. You need diluent. You need to shake it carefully. It cannot be exposed to sunlight or UV. So it has very limited time to be outside, and then it has to be discarded. So the risk of wastage for a very expensive and very precious vaccine. There's also operational complexity that may impact access, because most of these countries, or in fact all countries, have limited capabilities. Just to remind you, just when Pfizer came out, it was even the high-income countries that said, oh, we can never do this. Now the time pressure, the pressure of the pandemic has, we've handled it, and high-income countries now have built up the capabilities very rapidly, set up settings, transportations, bought the freezers, did all the logistics. But it is a major challenge for low to middle income countries. There are also regulatory approval processes that may take longer in certain countries, because an mRNA vaccine is a new platform. But the second challenge is the anaphylaxis. So the anaphylaxis for both mRNA vaccine, but Pfizer was rolled out first. So the data, there are more data available, and they were already published as early as January the 6th. So basically, although in the trial, anaphylaxis was not identified as a safety signal, because they also excluded people with a history of severe allergies. Basically, from day one onwards, we had cases of anaphylaxis within 15 minutes after vaccination. And here are the US data. So basically, there were 21 confirmed cases out of close to 2 million doses, which translate into 11.1 anaphylactic cases per 1 million doses. This is about 10 times higher than, for example, for influenza. Risk factors were documented in 80%. There was a history of documented allergies. In 33%, there was a history of anaphylaxis. And interestingly, a high proportion were female, but this is confounded by the fact that initially a lot of female healthcare workers were enrolled. But most of them were within 15 minutes or half an hour. But more difficult is there were also a few cases that had no history of severe allergies. The current thinking is that the allergies are related to the polyethylene glycol, and therefore people with a history of PAC allergy should be excluded. But basically it means we at WHO have made the specific recommendation that every person needs to be observed for 15 minutes, which makes it more difficult when you want to have a rapid throughput in mass vaccination. And those with a history of vaccination, so you have to ask for a history, have to be observed for 30 minutes. Not only that, this vaccine should only be administered in settings that are able, that have the resources, the access to epinephrine, and have the trained personnel to do immediate management for anaphylaxis. We cannot afford, I mean, we can't afford a death anytime, but we cannot afford a death that could also damage the reputation and damage the whole rollout of this vaccine. So in addition to the cold chain delivery problems, we also have to manage anaphylaxis. So let's come now to the COVID landscape. So basically, let me just see where I am. So basically, we have now 47 candidates that are in human clinical trials. We have now many that they're about to finish the phase 3 trial. And those in purple have shared their results with WHO. And as you know, for the Pfizer and Moderna, we have now also formulated our recommendations through the SAGE process. But Pfizer is to date the only one that has also received emergency use utilization. We're in close contact with Gamaleya that also seems to have a 90% efficacy. Currently, we are working on AstraZeneca. As you know, tomorrow, the European Medicine Agency will make their decision on the AstraZeneca vaccine, and the world is looking towards the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is the one that has from the very beginning started engaging with COVAX, has worked on a reduced pricing, has made sure that there is global access, is in contact with vaccine manufacturers in India, with the Serum Institute of India, and also with Korea, and mass production has already started. So we're all looking to those. From China, we are now starting to look into Sinopharm and Sinovac. Sinovac was trialed in Bhutan. But I've also highlighted 2 vaccines in red, one by Merck and one by Sanofi Pasteur. And both those vaccine developers just recently announced that their products have failed, so did not meet the minimum standards they wanted to see. And this is important to note and re-emphasize why we need a wide platform, because some vaccines, even from established producers like Merck or Sanofi, may fail. So currently, we now have these vaccines. So the good news about Pfizer is that just a week ago, Pfizer has now also finalized their negotiations with COVAX and will give 40 million doses now to COVAX. Now, 40 million doses, I agree, is a drop in the ocean. AstraZeneca has promised 100 million of doses. So this is the state of COVID-19 vaccines by today. 52 days since first country started vaccinating, and the UK, all compliments to the UK. UK was the first to register, so to have regulatory emergency approval. I mean, not approval, authorization, I call it, and to launch it on the 8th of December. And it's now 33 days that all European countries have received vaccines. But all of you also know about the incredible vaccine supply problems, the delays, and that promised doses have not yet been given. To date, more than 45 million vaccine doses have been administered around the world. 95% of those have been administered in 10 countries, highlighting the inequitable distribution. At least 7 different vaccines from 3 platforms have been administered, and they include the mRNA vaccine, Pfizer and Moderna, the viral vector, which is AstraZeneca, is already being used, and inactivated vaccines developed by China, which is Sinopharm and Sinovac. Rollout, and this is of note, has also started in 52 countries, including one LMIC, which is Guinea, and which is India, and one really low-income country, which is Guinea. So there are efforts to really include low-income countries from the very beginning. So although COVID-19 vaccination is now in full speed, we still have clearly unequal distribution. Having said that, we have to start with some countries, and there will always be the first country. And as we go along, there will be more countries. And we've only, it's only since the 8th of December of the first country regulatory authorization. And only on the 31st of December, the WHO gave emergency use listing for Pfizer. So we are moving ahead. The figure looks bad, but we need to be reminded we are still within that first 50 days or so of this vaccine. So this is our current understanding of the COVAX available supply. This is actually, it was presented to me yesterday from within WHO, but actually this data also publicly available. These data are subject to change and based on certain assumptions and based on the current negotiations that COVAX has and the signed agreements that COVAX has with the different companies. The good news is that in February, so this is next month, the first lot of vaccines will be sent to COVAX countries, but it is a small volume. So still a drop in the ocean. It will then start increasing in March, and then it will incrementally increase, contingent upon vaccine supply. The green are the secured volumes for which there are signed agreements. So there are signed agreements for up to 1.6 billion doses up till December this year. But there are also many others still under active negotiations. So there's still a lot of negotiation going on. This slide shows you the forecast by region. So you also get a feel for the regions. So in dark blue, purplish, it's the Afro region. So you will see the Afro region will already be targeted in the March dissemination of vaccine supplies, and then the tranches will increase as time goes on. So these are the current projections for the Afro, the Emerald, the Euro regions, and also PAHO. So what is the pathway to vaccine use in a country? And this is important to understand because it's not just about COVAX now decides to send out the vaccines. A lot must be in place before you send out, you disseminate or ship out your vaccines. You have to have your regulatory authorization. Some countries, some low middle income countries will use the authorization from a stringent regulatory authority, often the EMA, so the European Medicine Agency or the FDA or others. But many will also require by law to have their own national regulatory authorization. That takes time. Then you have to have the import approval. There must be a policy. How do you want to roll out? The policies must be in place on the prioritization of your priority groups. There must be procurement mechanisms in place. And there must be a plan how to execute the vaccine use. So what needs to happen now is on the regulatory side, it's all what we're currently going through is the stringent regulatory approvals. So like tomorrow, it's for AstraZeneca, it's the European Medicine Agency. It's the policy recommendations. So that's what I'm working on. It's the SAGE recommendations and country policies. And then it's the COVAX. Then you have to have the deals. Then you have to decide on how to allocate. There are lots of legal components. There's a lot of negotiations. So for example, the European Union was clearly a little bit delayed because we had to wait for agreements within all the 27 countries. And then it has to be the national deployment and vaccination plans that have to be in place. So COVAX participant countries, so countries that have applied to be participant need to be ready. So you have to submit a vaccine request form. For example, Tanzania a few days ago said, well, we actually don't want the vaccine. Some countries want the vaccine, so you have to send in the vaccine request form to COVAX. But you also are assessed, are you actually ready to receive the vaccine? And this is important for the public to understand. The public says, well, why is COVAX not just sending out all these vaccines? Well, a country needs to be ready to receive the vaccine, have the freezers in place, know how to give it to an adult population. LMICs are used to giving EPI vaccines to children. This is a totally different ballgame, and it needs a lot of thinking. How do you have access to the older population and to adult populations? There are also, as I said, the regulatory pathways, and regulatory, you cannot, they do take, they have to go through their due processes. They do take time. And then there is the whole issue of indemnification and liability. So the whole problem here is that given the speed and the scale of development and manufacturing scale up, the traditional risk transfers there was no time for manufacturers to negotiate traditional risk transfer solutions. So this is now why all countries in COVAX who receive COVID-19 vaccines through COVAX will be required or are required to identify manufacturers, the donors, and the distributors, and all other stakeholders against any losses that can occur in the deployment. For those that do suffer serious adverse events, there are mechanisms in place so that you can actually get financial compensation. But it's very important that all these liability and indemnification issues need time to negotiate. And this was also one of the reasons why the European Union was a little bit slower. So again, as I said, it's in full speed, but it's unequal distribution. And here you see the doses administered per 100 people. And here you see that Israel is leading by far, followed by the United Arab Emirates, then the United Kingdom, Bahrain, United States, and then you see a trickle of the European countries, and then basically none of the LMICs are listed here. I live in Switzerland. We have basically no access to vaccines, very poor vaccine supply. So let me now go into Israel. I think there's a lot to learn for us about Israel. So Israel, once the Pfizer results came out, they had a deal, they struck a deal with Pfizer, and they bought vaccines for their entire population, and their population size is 9 million. And they have an incredible program in place to accelerate vaccine coverage. So this is a few days ago, this is already outdated. This is by the 18th of January, it's already outdated, I can tell you. 80% of over 80 have been vaccinated. 86% for those 70-79, and for my age group, almost 50% already vaccinated for 50 to 59. Their intent is, their aim is to vaccinate the entire population above the age of 16 within 3 months. So by March, they want to finalize it. They have a special deal with Pfizer. I'm jealous that they have unlimited supply in return for delivering data. So there will be a lot to learn from Israel, because this will now be a small-sized country with relatively rapid vaccine coverage, where we can then study the vaccine effectiveness, safety issues, but we can also study at what stage of vaccine coverage you will see an indirect protection, and where then lockdowns and all the other measures can be stopped. So we are all looking towards the data that are coming out of Israel. What are the learnings for their success, their programmatic success? First of all, an incredible communication strategy. They use broad, easily identifiable priority groups with some flexibility in their program, so you would minimize wastage. So, for example, in contrast, the UK has a de-escalating approach. You go the 80s plus. Once you've done that, 70s plus and 60s plus, etc. Whilst Israel went to 60 plus and vaccinated. They use 350 sites throughout Israel, through 4 they called HMOs, where they have so it's a very centralized approach, where the military is helping. And as you know, Israel believes in a Shabbat, but in this case, they even work through the Shabbat. They work 7 days a week, and they're rolling throughout to increase the vaccine coverage. So there are some lessons to be learned from what currently the UK is doing, the US is doing, and Israel is doing. We need high uptake, and it's key for an effective program. The simpler the program, the easier and quicker it is it will be rolled out. It's easier to deliver. Age-based programs is better than risk-based programs, because we have learned a lot from countries that use, the age-based programs for influenza, and just using the same mechanisms. That's what the UK is doing. You have a relatively good uptake, but also not forgetting, when you try speed, it may come at the cost of not taking inequalities into account. And we're already seeing reports from the US that this is happening. And so it needs to be with a conscious approach all the time, that inequalities are taken care of, that those who may not have access to healthcare, communication, etc., that we go out the extra mile to vaccinate them. So flexibility is also needed, as we've learned from Israel. Then the last is conspiracy theories and rumors. They have played mayhem ever since the pandemic started. I've never seen such craziness. Infodemic is now a new word. Infodemic is a new specialty. It's a new skill. And we, as doctors, we clearly need to become better in communicating the efficacy and safety to the public. Vaccines will be the tool to combat the pandemic, and we will not be able to end this pandemic until we achieve high vaccine coverage rates. Therefore, our role in advocacy and communication is so important. And I do think we can benefit from this crisis to maybe overall increase the reputation and the value, the public health value of vaccines, not only for this vaccine, but also for other vaccines. So here are some conspiracy theories. mRNA vaccines genetically modify humans. I think the statement has been circulating for months, and I've even heard Christian doctors saying this. So we need to dispel this notion with facts, and these are the facts. The mRNA vaccine, through the mRNA vaccine, body cells are directed to produce the protein, which is the spike protein, for antibodies to build up against the spike protein. The mRNA is quickly degradable within minutes, so that it doesn't degrade. It is packaged in a lipid nanoparticle. It enters the cytoplasm, and via this lipid nanoparticle, it translates in the cytoplasm through the ribosomes. It never ever enters the nucleus. Never ever. It cannot intercalate with the DNA. Within the cytoplasm, the mRNA is then degraded through natural mRNAses, and the spike protein is secreted, and that's when the body recognizes the foreign antigen and builds the antibodies. It is factually, intellectually a fallacy. It cannot genetically modify humans. COVID-19 vaccines cause infertility. This is another rumor going around, especially in the Arab world or in the Muslim world. I have no idea how this came about. Maybe some of you know, but apparently there is one protein in the placenta that's similar to the spike protein in the vaccine, whatever. So if that is true, a natural infection would lead to infertility. We have not seen it, and would even be more reason to give the vaccines. Microchips are included for global tracking. This idea was promoted within QAnon and a lot of right extremists, where they think that the world will track them, and also where they intended to tarnish Bill Gates' reputation, or the Chinese, and saying the Chinese will have a microchip added to the vaccines. Simple answer: technologically impossible to do. I have no patience for this. Where I do have understanding is the notion, frequently expressed, that development was too fast. And I think this concern needs to be taken seriously. And indeed, we were very fast. Why were we so fast? We were able to speed up processes because we already had CEPI in place, we had the platforms in place, we had the governance in place. We worked hard, and there was a lot of money given, more resources than to any other pathogen in mankind's history. So there was a lot of money, and so we were able to work fast. But where we did not cut corners, and I said it in the last talk as well, was with the efficacy trials. We went through the full needs and full specifications of the efficacy trials, where we tried to accelerate where the processes. And also remember, a clinical trial length depends on the incidence of your disease of concern. And for COVID, it was very high. In fact, we all thought we would get first results in January, February, but then we had this acceleration in November, in October, and suddenly we were able to get first efficacy results. I think this is all I want to say about rumors. We need to communicate that we did not cut corners, that the efficacy trials were done with full rigor, that the regulatory approval processes have been done with full rigor. However, because of the speed, there are indeed some questions that we could not answer. For example, because we had a relatively short observation time, we do not know the duration of vaccine effectiveness. We do not know the speed of decay. We do not know when we need to booster. We also do not have results on how much the vaccines will impact transmission and viral shedding. We do not have data on specific subpopulations. We want data on co-administration with other vaccines, but we don't have these data. Often, this is part of the whole process, but it was more important to roll out the vaccine before we answered the question whether we can give it together with the influenza vaccine, for example. And there are other knowledge gaps that we still need to consider, and that is whether the new virus mutants will change the vaccine effectiveness. But there's also good news. You know, I really think that the conspiracy theories will wane as the world understands the need for the vaccine. And we've already seen an incredible rise in acceptability of the vaccines in almost all countries, to an acceptability that's close to 80% in most countries. So I think it's a matter of time. It's a matter of communication. It's a matter of advocacy. And we as Christian doctors need to be playing a part in communicating these vaccines in all transparency, with all the uncertainties, in a clear manner to the public, so that we have better uptake. There are three main areas that still require additional focus. For countries, especially low and middle income countries, we still need better details on supply chains and waste management. Countries need to work on cold chain plans. Countries that want to receive the vaccine, so low to middle income countries that are part of COVAX, need to produce risk communication plans. They need to be able to do investigations into adverse events, so we call them AEFI, and to do causality assessments. This is very important because if you have one wrong rumor, your whole program is in jeopardy. We need to better be able to target the populations. And we need to better work on costing and funding those countries also in the logistics, training for anaphylaxis, getting the freezer, training and developing all these policies. This is my last slide. In summary, different platforms have been developed. And as we, in the next weeks and months, we will also see there will be different vaccine characteristics with different trade-offs. For example, AstraZeneca may have a lower efficacy, but it is easier to administer and therefore will be much faster to achieve a higher coverage rate. So it would be an important trade-off. Currently, despite promises, vaccine supplies is the biggest current hurdle. And it's very difficult to overcome because you cannot just, magically conjure all these manufacturing capabilities. So this is what is currently our biggest challenge. And I think in delivery, we need to learn our lessons from Israel to see how they really did it. The good news is that COVAX will start distributing first vaccines to low and middle income countries as early as February and March. But initially, indeed, these are only in very low volumes. We do know that global vaccine coverage is necessary to interrupt global COVID-19 globally, and this will be likely, a real good global coverage will likely only be achieved by 2023, unless we get better manufacturing capabilities. But we also need to know, although universal vaccine coverage cannot be achieved soon, COVID-19 as a public health crisis, as it is, can be addressed earlier on, even if we achieve lower coverage, as long as we really try to have high coverage, 80% coverage of people at highest risk, which translates into about 20 to 30% coverage of the world. These are some links to what WHO has produced in terms of framework, the prioritization, our first recommendations, the critical questions that we ask. And thank you for your attention.
Thanks for an incredibly comprehensive presentation. So I wanted to come first of all to issues of supply. And given the logistic problems of the mRNA vaccines like Moderna and Pfizer, and the low cost and easy production of AstraZeneca and others, when we're talking about lower and middle income countries, and I'm thinking especially about those with high rates in Central and South America, do you see the answer for those countries as being AstraZeneca or what else? Where do you see we should be prioritizing vaccines for LMICs?
So I'm a little bit blindsided because obviously I've seen the data most for AstraZeneca, and we're still waiting for Sinopharm, Gamaleya, Sinovac, CanSino, and Janssen is coming out. So Janssen is coming out, and it could be very promising, and also Novavax. These data will all be coming out in rapid succession in the next weeks and months. So I think by end of March, or by April, we will have a whole armamentarium of vaccines that we can use. The good news about the Janssen vaccine, it may be a single dose. It's also easily, it's very convenient to use, and they are already in contact with COVAX, and we have negotiated prices, and that would be also an excellent vaccine. So to answer your question, in the moment it's AstraZeneca. In 2 months' time, we may have many more vaccines that can be used for low to middle income countries.
Thanks. Now, what we're hearing in ICMDA is that in lower and middle income countries, Sinovac, Sputnik V, Covaxin, and so on, vaccines produced in places like China, India, and Russia are being sold, and governments are buying vast quantities of these. What should LMIC governments be doing when confronted with the choice of being able to pay for something now that's not been through phase 3 trials, or waiting for something that has? And what's your perspective on that?
I think we owe the population that we finalize and complete phase 3 trials. Not all immunogenicity results translate into high efficacy, and we don't know the immune correlate. So clearly my answer is you have to finalize your phase 3 trial, and only then you should roll it out, in my view. But I must add, indeed, a lot of countries are racing for bilateral agreements. And that's because they think that COVAX is still too slow. And indeed, COVAX will only distribute vaccines that have gone through a stringent process of emergency use listing. And that does delay. So countries are right. COVAX is a bit slow, but for valid reasons. But as said, I think in 2 months' time, we will have access to many more vaccines. And I must say, I did look at the data from Sputnik 5, Sputnik from Russia. It does look good, and Sinopharm, it does look good. It's just that we have not seen the detailed data which we need for policy recommendation.
Now, given that COVAX's aim is 2 billion doses by the end of the year, and that's still far short of the 20 to 30% that we're looking for, you could vaccinate twice as many people if you only give them 1 dose. Would you like to comment? Is there a WHO or official view on what's happening in the UK, where we're rushing to give 1 dose to as many people as possible? And should that be a strategy more widely used given the poor supply?
Yes. So from a pragmatic point of view, what the UK is doing there's a lot of rationale for it. And we know from modeling, if it is better to roll out vaccines to a higher proportion, even if that vaccine has a lower efficacy, than giving half of the population a vaccine that may have a higher efficacy. So for the AstraZeneca vaccine, by the way, we do know that 12 weeks gives you a better efficacy than a shorter interval. So we do know those data. So for AstraZeneca, clear cut, there's evidence, go ahead. For the mRNA vaccines, we actually do not have data. And we also don't want to undermine, how do I put it? So we from WHO are a little bit more on the conservative side, and we only would want to make this recommendation when we have seen the vaccine effectiveness studies from the UK. So we're actually waiting for the UK. And for the time being, we would rather have that we keep to a relatively a narrow interval, because we only have data for that.
Why does regulatory approval seem to take so long for some vaccines that have already been through phase 3 trials? An obvious example is the UK has been using AstraZeneca for more than a month now, and the EU still hasn't approved it, although we're hoping it's going to happen tomorrow. And is there any way in which regulatory approval can be sped up, or are we really at the mercy of every country's legal framework?
So no, countries look upon stringent regulatory authorities, and so a lot of countries are using the EMA as their benchmark, and this fact does accelerate the processes. I can tell you that the regulatory processes for these vaccines are faster than any other vaccine in our history. So why is EMA slower now than the MHRA? And that is because they felt there were not enough data in certain age groups, and they wanted to see more data being accrued, and that's the whole reason. And the reason is in the UK, the older population was recruited later in the trial. Therefore, we do not have results in the older population, and EMA wanted to wait for those results.
Okay. And how about delays with WHO approval?
I think, so we at SAGE, we are very quick. As soon as you have an emergency use listing, or if EMA makes an approval, we are prompt. That we are very prompt. So maybe a few days or a week delay, but not more. Okay.
Now, AstraZeneca is allowing the production of their vaccine in lots of countries worldwide. We've seen the maps on TV and so on. What about the other manufacturers? Is there any way of helping the other manufacturers to allow their vaccines to be made much more widely, and what sort of pressure could be put on them to help them to agree to this?
Yeah, so I don't think it's a matter of pressure. They all want to sell their vaccine. It is a matter of logistics, and luckily, for example, now Sanofi Pasteur is now giving their vaccine manufacturing site to you for the mRNA vaccine from Pfizer. So but you have also seen there's a technical glitch for AstraZeneca in the vaccine supply, meaning 60% reduction, which is terrible. There was a fire in the Indian factory, which also delays. So there are technical glitches and there are complexities that you cannot accelerate. But indeed, there's a lot of political pressure. There's a lot of resources. We must do everything to ensure a bigger vaccine supply.
Question from Indonesia. What actually happened in Norway? Were those deaths due to anaphylaxis, or what's the inside track?
Yes. So because the vaccine was rolled out in the very old age group first, which includes 80 and 90 years plus, but also includes frail people, who, where sometimes just a little thing can, tip them off and they can die. So here, there was a safety analysis was done, and the conclusion of the committee was that this is all still within the normal background deaths. If you vaccinate 80 years old, some will die the next day. That's just the way life is. And it was all within that normality, within that normal background.
Okay. Now, in terms of the support COVAX will provide, will COVAX support distribution, storage, staffing, those sorts of things in low-income countries? And if not, who would or could support that? Because it's not just about the supply, it's a whole infrastructure, isn't it?
So I'm not into all the pricing, so I do not understand all the financing mechanisms. But what I understood from presentations is that COVAX will pay the cost of the vaccine, and the countries have to pay the cost of logistics. Now we recognize that freezers, storage, etc., is very expensive. So UNICEF is now donating some of the freezers, in addition to what COVAX is doing for the vaccines. But it does mean that the mRNA vaccines are just not so suitable for those countries. But there's some good news. Both Pfizer and Moderna are working on a second generation that may need less of these ultra cold chain requirements.
Now, German health officials just today have advised against using AstraZeneca in people over 65 due to a lack of trial data from this age group. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I spent the whole day on this topic. So, and so this is so the AstraZeneca trial. They started recruiting healthcare workers first, and also because I think the ethics said, well, wait and see for safety, and only then recruit older. So older persons were recruited later in the trial. Therefore, they have a shorter observation time. Therefore, your data are not so robust. You need to have a certain number of events for your robustness. So basically, they do not have robust data yet. Now, for Germany, it's easy. They can just say, oh, well, we have an alternative. We have Pfizer. But for other countries, they have no alternative. It is AstraZeneca. And so to be honest, so we at WHO discussed it the whole day. And we are almost there, but I may not be fully there, but we think even if the vaccine efficacy is lower in older people compared to younger, given the fact that most deaths occur in this age group, modeling studies show that you will still have an amazing public health impact.
Yes.
So, and therefore we will most likely still, I should not say anything publicly because who knows what's going to happen in the next few days. We are literally waiting for the European Medicine Agency tomorrow, because we are driven by some of the regulatory deliberations as well. So dependent on that, we will word it very carefully. But indeed, we do expect for a country that has no alternative that this should still be used also in older people, despite very strong evidence in that age group. Yet, if we just wait for another 4 weeks or 6 or 8 weeks, maybe we'll have accrued more data. The problem is, because of the pandemic, there's time pressure, and we do not want to delay the recommendations.
Now, you gave the example of Israel, and Israel's vaccination rollout has been absolutely incredible, really, to watch. Is there any data yet about the effect of that vaccination program? Are we seeing a fall in the number of cases and deaths, or is it too early to tell in Israel? And can you just remind us which vaccines Israel is using too?
So they're using almost exclusively the Pfizer vaccine. And they are producing data on a weekly basis. And there are some data already out in the media that show a reduction, but they only started, I think, mid-December. And remember, it takes at least 14 days after the first dose for vaccine efficacy to start. So you will only see an impact from now on. And I do know that they have now submitted data for publication, and I think they do look promising. But the accurate numbers, I don't know, and I can't give you. But there will be a lot to learn for us from Israel.
Yeah. Now, there's a big question in terms of equity around displaced populations, refugees, and so on, who are often in crowded conditions, people in urban slums. And so on. Who's taking responsibility for making sure that these people have access to vaccination, and also that their vaccinations are being properly documented? Yeah.
So they fall still under stage 2. In stage 1, in the very limited supply, and currently we are under very limited supply, the priority remains healthcare workers and older people. If, of course, refugees and those people fall in those high priority groups, like they're older than 65, they must receive the vaccine. The responsibility lies in the country with the governments, and WHO has no means to police and to monitor. So this is so I think it's the civic society, it's the press, it's the media, it is NGOs. We need to watch that this is indeed happening. But in a moment, I can tell you it won't happen until we have reached stage 2.
I guess there's a question too about, in LMICs particularly, what role corruption might play, or the influence of countries which have borders controlled by other countries. The Palestinian situation's been raised. Any comments on that, and how collectively as a global community we can help people get access in those situations?
I think in the moment we have very little room to maneuver, but I think in the months to come, we need to have a strong voice and do global advocacy, and also monitor and document and bring it to the press. So we have to document, and there will be corruption, and there will be people, shortcutting the queue. So and it's already happening. So our role is to make sure that this is known, and that people address these issues.
Perhaps an unanswerable question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Given what you know now about the speed of the rollout of vaccination, the aims of COVAX and others, what the likely regulatory timescales are, and phase 3 trials, what you know about all of that sort of stuff, would you like to make any predictions about when we might be getting back to normal in terms of normal life with the economy and schools and so on, but then also the bigger question of international travel as well, because there's a sense that until all of us are safe, none of us are safe.
Yeah.
What do you see looking into the future?
I do think we need another 4 year. Unfortunately, so there's I do think that once we have reduced the deaths and maybe the hospitalizations, then the pressure is not so high anymore, and then we have to live with cases in my age, in our age group, that may not lead to death. So I think the crisis, I think that peak, we will probably be able to address and to bring down in the next 6 months. I actually do believe that when Israel shows that if they really do achieve high coverage, and they probably can tell us how long it then takes to be back into normalcy. International travel is something else, because here it's not only about equitable access, what WHO says, or it's also about country requirements. So some countries will continue with quarantine, other countries or airlines will require this and that. So I think there's a whole ball game. So this year, unfortunately, I must say, will be a lot of uncertainty, waiting for vaccine supplies, being disappointed. I mean, I'm personally very disappointed by that Pfizer has now stopped supply to, for example, my country, Switzerland. We have no more supply. So I think this year is not going to be that good, unfortunately.
We're all aware of the spat that's going on at the moment between the UK with its AstraZeneca and the EU with its Pfizer. Do you see a lot of cross-border disputes and international disagreement coming in the next few months? And if so, how can we best mitigate about this for this?
Yeah, we should all become politicians. Yes, no, I do expect that there will be a lot of upheaval. So it's a communication challenge, and it's a political challenge. The question is more, what can we do as Christian doctors?
Yeah, and that was my next question. So that was my next question was, to this group here, all of whom are Christian doctors or dentists, or almost all, and we're all praying about this situation. We're trying to keep up with the news on it. A lot of us get asked advice and asked to speak on these issues. You've mentioned the danger of the myths and the infodemic of false information and so on. But any particular advice and encouragement for Christian medics at this time? How can we best help?
I think we should be very proactive in positively communicating about the value of these vaccines and why they're important, and bring the facts and be transparent about. I mean, the dispelling all these myths is all these myths is our duty. And unfortunately, a lot of Christian doctors are part of the problem, and they promote that mRNA vaccines genetically humify humans. So we need to bring the science. We need to be transparent, what we know, what we do not know. I think people will then start trusting us, and we need to be an example. If we have the chance to get vaccinated, we'll tell everyone we got vaccinated, and look, I'm not yet genetically modified. I survived it. So I think we need to be part of the communication publicly, within social media, in our science, in our day-to-day contact with patients.
Well, I'm afraid we've run out of time. I'd love to go on, and there are many more questions as well. But let me just ask you a final, personal question, if you don't mind. And that's to say, as a Christian working at very high level, advising the WHO and seeing the big picture in the way that you do, you're communicating, I think, a lot of hope about the future and a very clear pathway for us as a global community. But could I ask you, how do you find it as a Christian? What sustains you day by day and helps you to remain optimistic, energetic, motivated in this whole fight?
I think I think the role to play now in shaping policy formulations that are ethically driven, that are transparent and have a scientific base. I really enjoy it. It is. I think it's a time in history where one can shape and where one can play a role. I mean, the role is minimal. I'm just one out of many in WHO and with all these experts, but it is an exciting time, and it can. We've already seen it. It can go wrong, and I think our duty is now, how can we make sure that we drive, the whole QAnon, the doomsday cult, that we now get us out of that negative thinking into a positive, hopeful, messaging the hope that there is a way out. And also there's a duty to learn the lessons and indeed, make all learn whatever bad God is still in control and wants to make use of it. And there's so many lessons we can learn on how that will shape our future in terms of climate, family life. I personally have a much more balanced family life than I've ever had before. So there are lots of positive things that we can communicate as well. And learning how to interact with all of you. What a fantastic chance. So I think that's our duty.
Thank you so much. And it's a reminder, isn't it, that in every crisis, there's both threat, but also opportunity. And as Mordecai said to Esther, for such a time as this, we need to be prepared to stand up, which is what you are doing. And I'm sure those listening today will have learned a lot and be much better equipped to do that. It remains me to say thank you very much for our translators. Thank you for Josh doing all the tech stuff. Thank you again to Annelies. And thank you for all of you for coming along and making this really worthwhile to do. God bless you. And hopefully we'll see you again next week. Thank you.